My wife laughed during our divorce hearing until the judge exposed her lies. Hey Reddit, throwaway account here because my main is way too recognizable. I never thought I'd end up being that guy airing his dirty laundry online, but after what happened in court today, I honestly don't know how to process it except to just lay it all out. Maybe someone will relate, or maybe I'll just get some of this poison out of my system. I guess I'll start with the basics. My name's Adam, not real name, obviously. I'm 38, and up until last year, I thought I had a pretty normal marriage. My wife, let's call her Julia, always had this magnetic energy, the kind of person who makes every room brighter. We met in grad school, spent our 20s building careers, survived some tough years, and eventually bought a little house together. No kids, though we tried. Things started to shift about 2 years ago. It was subtle at first. Julia started staying late at work more often. She's a paralegal for a big firm, so I didn't think much of it. I chalked it up to stress. But then she started accusing me of being distant, cold, inattentive. I tried harder, made dinners, suggested trips, even booked a couples counseling session. But it was like she'd already checked out. What I didn't see then were the little ways she'd twist things. Like the time she lost her wedding ring for a week, only to find it in her gym bag. Her friend, Kate, later let it slip that Julia never wore it out anymore. Or the way she started keeping her phone face down, always password protected. My gut told me something was off, but I ignored it. After all, she was my wife. Then, about 8 months ago, I found texts. Not explicit, but intimate. Emotional. They weren't to me. That was the beginning of the end. Walking into the courthouse for our first hearing, I felt like a man being led to the gallows. My lawyer, Rachel, did her best to keep me calm, but all I could think about was Julia, how angry she looked the night I confronted her about the texts, how she called me controlling for asking questions. Now here we were, 2 years of suspicion and resentment laid bare for total strangers. Julia showed up in the sharp navy suit, looking every bit the composed professional. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her lawyer, some slick guy named David, shook her hand and gave me this look like I was already guilty. When the hearing started, Julia was all business. She spoke in this brittle, too loud voice, detailing how I'd emotionally neglected her, how I'd grown paranoid and spied on her phone. She started laughing, actually laughing, when her lawyer made a crack about me having too much free time. A couple of people snickered. I felt like I was shrinking right there in my chair. I tried to defend myself, but every word came out flat, defensive, desperate. Rachel leaned in, whispering, "Let them talk. The more they pile on, the better it'll be for us when the truth comes out." But at that moment, it just felt like I was being crucified, my character shredded in front of Julia, her friends, even her mom, who sat glaring at me from the gallery like I was something she scraped off her shoe. It wasn't just the accusations, it was the way Julia twisted our history. She described arguments we'd had, but always with herself as the wounded, patient party. I sat there stunned, listening to her rewrite the story of our life together as if I'd been some distant villain all along. After the session, outside the courtroom, Julia brushed past me and whispered, "You always were pathetic." It echoed in my head for days. After that first hearing, my world shrank. Friends who used to invite us to dinners or message me about game nights started dropping off, one by one. Mutual friends split into her side or neutral, and most picked silence. Only my old college roommate, Mike, stuck around. He'd listen to me vent, sometimes bring over pizza, mostly just let me sit in silence. He never pushed me to explain myself, which was a blessing. By then, I was too ashamed to even try. My parents, God bless them, tried to be supportive, but I could tell my mom was shaken. "Adam, is any of this true?" she'd ask in a voice that tried to be gentle but was edged with fear. The worst part was seeing doubt flicker across her face, like she couldn't reconcile her son with the guy Julia described in court. Rachel, my lawyer, became my anchor. She started digging into Julia's claims, picking apart every accusation, tracking down emails, receipts, even security camera logs from my office to prove where I'd been on nights Julia claimed I was stalking her. I never thought I'd be grateful for corporate keycard entries, but here we were. Meanwhile, Julia kept playing the part of the wounded spouse, telling anyone who'd listen that she just wanted to move on. Social media was a minefield. Her posts, vague, just enough to hint at some unnamed betrayal, were magnets for sympathy. "Stay strong, girl. You deserve so much better," her friends would comment. I stopped looking after a while, but the screenshots kept finding their way to me. At the next hearing, Julia upped the ante. Her lawyer claimed I'd threatened her, produced text messages, cropped screenshots, conveniently where I supposedly lost my temper. I recognized some of the words, but not the order, not the context. They'd been edited, or maybe pieced together from different conversations. As I sat there, heart pounding, Julia caught my eye and smiled. It was the same smile she'd given me on our wedding day. Only now it was cold, triumphant, like she already knew how this story ended. After that second hearing, I hit a new low. I barely slept. Even when I closed my eyes, I'd replay those moments in court. Julia's laughter, her lawyer's smirk, the way even the judge seemed to be losing patience with she said. There were days I wondered if maybe I was the villain. Maybe I really did lose myself, somehow became the husband Julia described. Self-doubt is a disease, and it was eating me alive. Rachel kept telling me to hold on, that something would break. She's overplaying her hand, she insisted. And people who lie always slip up. I wanted to believe her, but all I felt was hopelessness and this hollow ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. One night, Mike showed up with a six-pack and a USB stick. "I know you said not to get involved," he said, "but I had to look into something." He explained that he'd noticed Julia's social media timelines didn't match up. She'd posted a selfie with friends at a bar the night. She swore under oath she was home alone, afraid, because I'd supposedly threatened her. Rachel jumped on it. She started pulling Julia's public posts, piecing together a different timeline. "This could be big," she said. "If we can show she's lying about this, the rest of her story could collapse." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny, stubborn spark. The next hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I stayed low. My parents finally believed me when I showed them Julia's conflicting posts. My dad, usually stoic, hugged me hard and said, "We'll get through this, son." Mike's loyalty gave me strength. Even so, I was terrified. What if the judge didn't care? What if no one wanted to see the truth? The day before court, Rachel called. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow could change everything." Walking into the courtroom that morning, I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, one step from disaster, one step from freedom. Rachel looked more focused than ever, clutching her folder of evidence like it was Excalibur. Julia arrived late, all dramatic sighs and whispered complaints to her lawyer. I tried not to look at her, but I could feel her eyes burning holes in my back. The hearing started with Julia's lawyer pushing for a restraining order, referencing those doctored texts and her fear for her safety. Rachel calmly asked if she could present new evidence. The judge, who honestly looked exhausted by both sides at this point, nodded, almost bored. I thought, this is it. This is my shot. Rachel started with the social media posts. One by one, she projected screenshots onto a monitor. "This is the night in question," she explained. Mrs. Thomas claimed under oath that she was home, alone, in distress. And yet, at 9:12 p.m., she posted this photo from the Green Lion bar, tagging 3 friends. She kept going. Photos, check-ins, timestamps, comments from friends, all showing Julia laughing, drinking, even mentioning in a comment, "Best girls' night ever." Love escaping real life for a while. Julia's face went white. Her lawyer tried to object, but Rachel was relentless. She pointed out inconsistencies in Julia's sworn statements and asked the judge for permission to subpoena her phone records to confirm her location. For the first time, the judge seemed alert, leaning forward, eyes narrowed at Julia. Then Rachel dropped the final bombshell. One of Julia's friends, unknowingly tagged in a post, had already given a written statement confirming Julia's whereabouts that night, completely contradicting Julia's sworn testimony. For a moment, the courtroom was dead silent. Julia's hand shook as she tried to whisper to her lawyer. The judge turned to her, voice calm but icy. "Mrs. Thomas, do you understand the seriousness of perjury?" I looked over at Julia. For the first time since all this began, I saw something crack in her, something almost like fear. That moment in the courtroom felt frozen in amber. I watched as Julia's carefully constructed composure broke, her lips trembling, her eyes darting between the judge, her lawyer, and the floor. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who'd mocked me, who'd painted me as a monster, now seemed suddenly small. Her lawyer tried to regroup, mumbling about possible misunderstandings, but the judge wasn't having it. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a material contradiction. Mrs. Thomas, you swore under oath. I strongly advise you to speak with your counsel about the implications of perjury. Julia's mom, who had always glared at me from the gallery, was now staring at her daughter in disbelief. My parents sat in the back row, my mom with both hands pressed over her mouth. Mike, loyal as ever, looked like he wanted to leap to his feet and cheer, but he just gave me a quick, steady nod. As the judge called a recess, Julia burst into tears. I'd never seen her cry like that, deep, ragged sobs, her head buried in her hands. Even her friends, her so-called support squad, looked uncomfortable, shuffling their feet, avoiding her gaze. Rachel led me out into the hallway. You did it, she whispered. You held on, and the truth came out. I wanted to feel victorious, but mostly I just felt hollow. I kept thinking about all the nights I'd lain awake, blaming myself, doubting my own memories, wondering if I was truly broken. The news spread quickly. By the time we returned from recess, word had trickled through the waiting area. People whispered, looked at me differently, some with sympathy, some with open curiosity. Julia's lawyer was now whispering furiously to her, no longer quite so smug. The judge returned and announced that, given the seriousness of Julia's false statements, he was ordering an immediate review of all her evidence and suspending any pending actions against me. Suddenly, the tide had turned, and everyone knew it. The walk out of that courtroom was nothing like the walk-in. For the first time since this nightmare started, people met my eyes without pity or suspicion. Mike slapped my back so hard I almost stumbled, grinning like he'd won the lottery. My parents pulled me into a hug right in the courthouse hallway. My mom actually sobbed into my shoulder, all the tension of the last few months spilling out. Julia, on the other hand, looked utterly lost. Her mother tried to pull her aside, but Julia just shook her off and hurried out a side door, head bowed. Even her closest friends, the ones who'd posted all those hashtag Team Julia memes, kept their distance, whispering to each other and pointedly ignoring her. That support network she'd built by painting me as the villain evaporated in a matter of minutes. Back at home, my phone lit up with texts. Some mutual friends sent cautious apologies, admitting they didn't know what to believe before and now felt awful. I replied to the ones who seemed genuine. I ignored the rest. I learned the hard way who actually stood by me when things got ugly. Rachel called that evening to confirm. The judge had not only thrown out all of Julia's key evidence, but was considering sanctions against her for perjury. You're in the clear, Adam. Legally and otherwise. She can't hurt you anymore. I wanted to celebrate, but all I felt was relief, tinged with exhaustion. It wasn't victory, it was survival. Later that night, Mike came over with 2 beers and, in typical Mike fashion, said, you know, this calls for a trashy action movie and takeout. We sat on my battered couch, half watching explosions on screen, letting the silence say what words couldn't. But I couldn't stop thinking about Julia, how someone I loved, trusted, and built a life with had tried to destroy me. The lies, the betrayal, the way she laughed as she tore me down in public. It was over, but the scar felt fresh and raw. The days that followed were strangely quiet. The courtroom drama faded, replaced by a kind of numb normalcy. I went back to work, fielding awkward glances and forced small talk from colleagues who'd heard rumors but never asked questions. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again, even if I wasn't quite sure what to do with that freedom. Some friends drifted back into my life, mostly those who'd stayed neutral or who admitted they'd been fooled by Julia's act. I was polite but cautious. Trust was something I didn't give away easily anymore. My parents called every night, just to check in. Even my dad, never one for emotional conversations, started telling me how proud he was that I'd held my head high. I ran into Julia at the grocery store about a week after the hearing. She looked thinner, tired, the bravado completely gone. She saw me and froze, then looked away. Part of me wanted to demand an apology, some kind of reckoning, but what would be the point? There was nothing left to say. Her lies had cost her everything. Reputation, friendships, even her job. Word got around in the legal community fast, and her firm mutually parted ways with her a few days after the verdict. The mutual friends who had doubted me mostly stayed silent. A few sent long, rambling messages trying to explain their absence, their need to believe women, or stay out of drama. I understood, but it still hurt. The real friendships, though, the ones that stayed true, felt deeper now, forged in fire. Mike, as always, kept things real. "You survived hell, man," he said over coffee one morning. "That's all anyone needs to know." And he was right, in his simple way. But healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights, I'd wake up sweating, replaying Julia's laughter, that feeling of being powerless, the world believing her lies. I had to remind myself, that's over. She doesn't get to own my story anymore. Healing wasn't glamorous or fast. There wasn't a single moment when I moved on. Instead, it was 100 small choices. Making myself go for a walk, answering my mom's calls, letting Mike drag me to a concert, actually eating breakfast before work. For months, every courthouse memory still felt raw, like a sunburn under a shirt. But slowly, the pain dulled into something I could live with. I started seeing a therapist, mostly because Rachel suggested it was about more than just legal scars. Those sessions hurt, sometimes more than the divorce itself. We talked about trust, about how it felt to be gaslit and disbelieved, about my fear that I'd never really trust anyone again. She told me that surviving betrayal didn't make me weaker or suspicious, it just made me human. I'm still working on believing that. Work became a sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, finally finishing that app redesign I'd shelved during the worst months. I found small victories. Positive feedback from my boss, running into coworkers who admitted they'd heard the gossip and were glad I'd come out the other side. Those moments meant more than I expected. One Saturday, Mike organized a small barbecue, inviting just the handful of friends who'd really shown up for me. We laughed, reminisced, even joked about the worst breakup stories. Mine won, hands down. For the first time in a long while, I felt like myself. Not just the guy who'd survived Julia's lies, but the friend, the son, the regular guy I'd almost forgotten I was. A month after the final hearing, I got a letter from the court. Case closed, all false claims dismissed. I sat on my porch reading it, a quiet weight finally lifting from my chest. Julia never reached out again, and I didn't need her to. Closure wasn't about her. It was about reclaiming my dignity, bit by bit, choice by choice. If you've made it this far, first of all, thanks. I started writing this just to get the story out of my head, but now I hope it helps someone else in the trenches. Looking back, the thing that shocks me most isn't Julia's betrayal or the courtroom spectacle. It's how much I doubted myself, how easily I started believing I was worthless just because someone I loved said I was. There's no neat resolution to this kind of pain. Sometimes I still feel echoes of shame or flashes of anger. I've realized that betrayal leaves a bruise, not a scar. It fades, but it's sensitive for a long time. What matters is what you do with the pain. To anyone out there fighting to prove their truth, don't give up. Find the people who really see you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Legal, emotional, whatever you need. And remember, your self-worth isn't up for debate, no matter who tries to rewrite your story. You aren't defined by the worst thing someone said about you in anger or jealousy. As for justice, I learned that the truth has a stubborn way of clawing its way to the surface, even if it takes longer than you'd like. Standing up for yourself might feel humiliating, even hopeless, but it's worth it. Dignity is built in those moments when you refuse to let someone else's lies become your reality. If you're just starting down the road of divorce or you're facing false accusations, my advice is simple. Document everything, trust your gut, and hold tight to your real friends. Let go of those who abandon you. Their absence is its own kind of answer. I'm still learning to trust, still learning to believe that I deserve happiness and peace. But I know this, the truth matters, and so do you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Thanks for reading, Reddit. Here's to better days ahead.